Tonight on Bridge City News, a gas leak at Galbraith Elementary School forces students and teachers to evacuate. The City of Kelowna and not Lethbridge won the right to host the 2020 Memorial Cup. We have local reaction. And we chat with former Tory MP Maxime Bernier about his new party and why he feels he is the best choice to become Prime Minister. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Students at Galbraith Elementary School were evacuated yesterday. Around 2 p.m., school staff noticed a smell that was unfamiliar and evacuated students as they thought it could be a gas leak. Emergency services were called while staff took the students to their evacuation site, Wilson Middle School. Classes were back in full swing today as it was determined the smell came from a sewer gas leak which was dealt with in one of the boot rooms. Lethbridge residents were greeted yesterday with the unfortunate news that the Memorial Cup will not be coming to our city in 2020, but instead will go to Kelowna, BC. Both Mayor Chris Spearman and Hurricanes General Manager Peter Anholt expressed their disappointment today.
We expected to win. We had went into this process expecting to win, and when you don't win, you're mad, and that's the way it is. And you think, okay, if that's the way it is, we'll regroup and we'll move forward.
I think we have a great team. I think the Hurricanes management has done a tremendous job the last 3 or 4 years turning the team around. And I think we have a great facility in the NMAX that the city continues to invest in. So we have everything that's needed to host an event like the Memorial Cup. And, yeah, I'm disappointed we didn't win. And we'll look forward to bidding on another occasion, supporting the Hurricanes in their bids.
3 people have been arrested following another drug bust in our city. Alert Lethbridge's organized crime and gang team searched a home in West Lethbridge September 27th and seized carfentanil, methamphetamine, cannabis, a cocaine buffing agent, weapons, and a lot of stolen property. The 3 suspects were taken into custody. They include 38-year-old Curtis Carbert, 28-year-old Devin Jones, and 39-year-old Chastity Morin. Carbert was already wanted on a number of warrants issued by Lethbridge and Calgary Police. Alert wants to remind you that you see any drug or gang-related activity in your neighborhood, call Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-TIPS. That's 1-800-222-8477. There seems to be a difference of opinion as to which drugs are having the largest negative impact in our city. According to Alert Staff Sergeant Jason Wolper, methamphetamine has taken over from opioids as the #1 choice on the streets. Jill Manning, who's the managing director of the safe injection site Arches, disagrees. She says meth is actually on the decline in our city.
So here at Arches, whenever anyone comes to visit the supervised consumption facility, there are a couple of questions that we ask them upon every visit. And those questions include things like what substance is it that you're planning to consume today, how is it that you're planning to consume it, and how much of it are you planning to consume. What we've seen over the 7 months that we have been operational, within the first 2 weeks of operations, methamphetamine was being used just shy of 70% of the uses in this facility were meth. So 67.7% of all drug use within this facility was meth. And our latest data, which is as of September 24th, actually reveals that meth use has dropped dramatically within the community. So now we're sitting at about 39% of all drug use within the facility is methamphetamine.
Emergency Dr. Sean Wild gave SACPA his perspective today on the drug crisis in Lethbridge. Wild, who works at the Chinook Regional Hospital, said he wanted to inform the public about the challenges surrounding addiction and why it's so hard to overcome. He touched on what is called the reptilian brain. It is the part of our brain that's engineered to avoid pain and seek pleasure. He also stressed that though the opioid crisis is one that's affecting all of North America, alcohol remains by and large the top substance that addicts struggle with. Even so, he says if people will overcome addiction, they and those around them need to conquer that feeling of helplessness.
That's one thing that I have found, and speaking to many of my colleagues working in emergency medicine on the front lines, we deal with a lot of the obvious personality problems and abuse that can come from this troubled population, but we also get a chance to see their vulnerabilities, their humanity, and I think it gives us a special perspective that yeah, these are people, they need help, and helping them is difficult, but it's the right thing to do.
Wild says even though he and many others in the healthcare industry are frustrated by the crisis, he's been encouraged to see the involvement of the community to try and overcome it. Red Deer is hosting the Canada Winter Games in February, and to begin the celebration, the City of Lethbridge has raised their flag. The 2019 Winter Games torch relay began today in Ottawa and will make its way across the country over the next few months. The torch stops in Lethbridge January 16, 2019, before heading north and ending in Red Deer for the opening ceremonies. The introduction of the new Universal Transit Pass at the U of L has increased ridership in West Lethbridge, so the city will be making some changes. Starting next Tuesday, the West Lethbridge Route 32 going to the university will increase in frequency during the peak morning hours. The route will run between 7 and 9:30 a.m. every 10 minutes instead of every 15 minutes. The changes will be made on a trial basis and will be closely monitored. The U-Pass was introduced last month to be included in tuition fees for all students enrolled at the University of Lethbridge. A Canadian study that included a group from the University of Lethbridge says 2/3 of Canadian children are not meeting a healthy standard of physical literacy. As Josie Foster reports, local child athletes are discovering benefits in all areas of their lives.
Do you sit at a desk for a lot of the day?
Yes.
Yeah. And how do you feel about that, Nora?
I don't like it because I get sore just sitting there, and I usually sometimes yawn in class.
Seeing them, the way that they problem solve through stuff, that is instilled in any sport nowadays, you know, as well as respecting a coach, and that goes with respecting your teacher and the people that work in the schools.
It doesn't have to be expensive, it doesn't have to be complicated. It's just a matter of getting out and doing a variety of activities with your kids. So, you know, if you go hiking and you go and you do the stairs, and then maybe you can rent or borrow a basketball from the public library, because they have a huge physical literacy equipment collection that you can borrow.
Physical literacy refers to having the knowledge and understanding, the motivation and the confidence, as well as the physical competence to engage in and enjoy a physically active lifestyle.
Physical literacy starts at a young age, and that's through kindergarten. You know, you look at the kids, they learn through play, and that's part of being physically active.
A national study by the CHEO accumulated data from over 10,000 Canadian children with the help of 11 university cities, Lethbridge included. Dr. Jennifer Copeland coordinated a group of local students to collect data from more than 1,300 local children aged 8 to 12. The goal was to study physical literacy, and the results were published in 14 articles in a special supplement of the BMC Public Health Medical Journal.
Those with higher physical literacy were healthier, they were more physically active, they had lower screen time, so they were more likely to meet our guidelines for physical activity and for sedentary behavior. So there really are broad-reaching health benefits to being physically literate and to engaging in physical activity.
The Canadian Assessment for Physical Literacy's website contains training materials and videos of the screening tasks required to test your children's physical literacy. For Bridge City News, I'm Josie Foster.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau defended calling the Conservative Party ambulance-chasing politicians. This comment was made after a testy House of Commons exchange with the Tories over convicted murderer Terry Lynn McClintick's transfer to a healing lodge. McClintick was serving time in a federal prison for the murder of Tory Stafford.
This is about the contrast between a party and a government that respects the rules, that respects the independence of our judicial system, that appreciates the professionalism of our correctional services, and a party of ambulance-chasing politicians who are, quite frankly, demonstrating a contempt for the principles of law and debate in this House that is inexcusable.
Former Conservative MP Maxime Bernier is preparing for the 2019 fall election with his party called the People's Party of Canada. Bernier was on Bridge City News recently and says he believes Canadians want a change in government, and it's not the Tories or the NDP.
But what happened in Quebec this week with a new government, and in also New Brunswick with a new government, people are ready to vote for a new party. They voted for the CAQ in Quebec, so they're ready to vote for a new party. I think they want real change in this country, and the old parties that are doing politics and they try to please everybody and with promising everything to everybody. Canadians are fed up with that. They want to change, and we will represent that change.
Catch my full interview with Monsieur Bernier as he explains why he should become Prime Minister, coming up in the second half of our show. Manitoba says it will scrap a planned carbon tax that was set to be levied in December. Premier Brian Pallister says the province will move forward with its own climate change plan that does not include a carbon tax. Last year, the province received legal advice that Ottawa has the power to impose a carbon tax, but only on provinces that do not implement plans of their own. Pallister says Manitoba could not get assurances from Ottawa that it would impose a higher tax. Ontario Premier Doug Ford met with Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe in Saskatoon today to discuss Ottawa's carbon tax. Ford says Ontario and Saskatchewan are going to stand up to what he calls Trudeau's tax and spend policies. Ford's BC government is challenging the federal government's carbon pricing plan in court. Moe's government has asked Saskatchewan's Court of Appeal to rule on whether the federal plan is unconstitutional. Outgoing Quebec Premier Philippe Couillard announced today that he is stepping down as Liberal leader and resigning his seat in the legislature. The Liberals were swept out of power in Monday's election by the CAQ.
A well-funded secretariat, along with a minister dedicated to defending and representing their interests, because we are all first-class Quebecers. I want them to know, I want you to know, that I did not do this for short-term electoral reasons, but because of a profound belief in a truly inclusive Quebec.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is urging the incoming Quebec government to reflect very carefully before invoking the notwithstanding clause over its proposed ban on public officials wearing religious symbols.
I don't think it'll surprise anyone to hear me say that I don't think that any state should be dictating what people wear or don't wear. I think this is something that we've clearly stated. Defending people's rights and freedoms is core to certainly what I believe in and what my party and my government believes in, so we will continue to make that very clear. As I said in the case of Doug Ford, using the notwithstanding clause to override or suspend people's fundamental rights or liberties is not something to do lightly, is something to reflect through very, very carefully, both about the actions and its consequences, and that's certainly what we hope the approach that the provincial government here seems to be taking.
Mental illness is becoming a real issue with Canadians, especially as they reach middle age. Chris Somerville is with the Canadian Alliance on Mental Illness and Mental Health. He says symptoms start appearing as early as the age of 40.
By the age of 40, about 50% of the population has had or has a mental illness. And that's a figure that really surprises people, that nearly half of Canadians will have or have a mental illness.
Catch my entire interview with Chris discussing how mental illness is impacting so many families coming up in the second half of our show. School officials say one child was killed and 3 others were injured after their school bus crashed in North Texas yesterday afternoon. Police say a power line struck the bus, which then caught on fire, but the exact cause of the wreck remains under investigation. A spokesperson with the Mesquite School District says the bus was carrying 42 students from Terry Middle School. Mesquite is a suburb located just east of Dallas. Police say 6 people were hurt when a pickup truck crashed into a Michigan bank. Police say the truck veered off a road, struck a minivan, went through the building, and hit an SUV. One witness described what she saw.
We heard the glass coming, and then I look over, and the truck just went straight through it. Narrowly missed a lady. Thank goodness she was at the counter, and the bank manager. But I think everybody inside was safe.
We've been through the bank. We searched the building completely, shut power off. We have our city personnel coming. We're going to look at, obviously, structural damage to that facility, keep everybody away from there. Looked under all the vehicles, so everything's been checked. We're pretty satisfied. We have everybody accounted for right now.
A man shot 7 police officers in South Carolina today, killing 1. Police say it was a standoff so dangerous, police used a bulletproof vehicle to rescue the wounded. Authorities say the shooting began as officers served a warrant. The suspect is now in custody.
These officers went there unknowing the firepower this suspect had. And again, they thought it was a random search warrant. But when they arrived, gunfire started. Several officers were hit. And I want to thank Florence Police Department. Those guys were they were minutes away and assisted us as well.
They were responding to the scene of an incident where they knew that their brothers from the sheriff's office, their brothers and sisters from the sheriff's office were in need, as we all do, and they do for us.
Aid is very slowly trickling into areas crippled by the devastating earthquake and tsunami in Indonesia. Unfortunately, food, water, fuel, and medicine have yet to reach the hardest hit areas outside of Palu, which is the largest city most heavily damaged. The Red Cross is still trying to assess how many children have been separated from their parents. The death toll has now climbed to 1,407, while scores of uncounted bodies could still be buried in collapsed buildings. A cloudy and cool day in our city today. Lots of sunshine and warmer temperatures are on the way. I'll have complete weather details in just a moment. A mainly cloudy day today. Tonight, clearing with a low near -4. Tomorrow, lots of sunshine and a high near 9. Slightly cooler on Saturday with a high of 5 expected. Sunday, mainly clear and a high again near 9 degrees. Thanksgiving holiday Monday, sunshine with a high near 9. Tuesday, back to school and back to work with a slight chance of flurries and a high of only +1. Checking our almanac, the average high for this time of year is 17 degrees and an average low of 2. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1943 at 32 degrees, and the record low was -11 in 2000. Sunrise was at 7:35, sunset at 7:05. Let's have a look at how tomorrow's shaping up across the country. A chance of showers developing in Vancouver with a high of 12 expected. Victoria will have periods of rain and a high near 12 as well. It'll be partly cloudy in Calgary tomorrow with a high near 6. Lots of sunshine and 6 degrees as well in our provincial capital. Periods of snow on tap for Regina tomorrow and a high of only 3. Just a few clouds and 8 is on tap for Saskatoon tomorrow. Snow mixed with rain and a high of 3 for Winnipeg on Friday. It'll be mainly sunny and 13 in Toronto. Ottawa will have lots of sunshine and should get up to 9. Montreal will be mainly sunny and 11. Over in the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will be mostly clear and 11. Halifax, Nova Scotia will have a few showers and 16. Charlottetown, PEI will have a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of 10. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, showers and a high near 18 is expected. Alberta Premier Rachel Notley says she does not agree with Ottawa's decision not to appeal the court decision that squashed the approval of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. The feds made the decision when it announced that former Supreme Justice Frank Iacobucci has been appointed to oversee a new round of consultations with Indigenous groups. The aim is to address shortcomings identified by the Federal Court of Appeal in the ruling that put the expansion on hold. Notley says the government should have kept all options open, including an appeal. The possibility of a work stoppage continues to hover over Canada Post. The new contract proposals from the Crown Corporation to 50,000 of its employees has been criticized by the union. The Canadian Union of Postal Workers says the proposals fall short on job security, especially for rural and suburban carriers. Canada Post says it offers to those carriers include improvements to pay, benefits, and job security. The union met with Canada Post earlier today to get clarifications of the proposals before deciding what to do next. Farm Credit Canada is offering support for its hog-producing customers hit hard by international trade disputes. Hog prices in Canada have dropped 30% over the past few weeks due to a rising supply of pork in the U.S. and tariffs on U.S. pork exports applied by large pork importing companies. The collapse in U.S. hog prices also brought prices down in Canada to a level where many operations are no longer profitable. FCC President Michael Hofford says it will consider deferral of principal payments and other loan payments to reduce the financial pain of the price drop. Federal Agriculture Minister Lawrence MacAulay says he supports the FCC's decision. Mercer International has announced a deal to buy a company that owns all or part of 2 bleached kraft pulp mills in Canada. The deal is worth $465 million. Mercer says the acquisition will boost its annual production capacity for the pulp by 41%. DMI owns a bleached kraft pulp mill in Peace River and a 50% stake in a joint venture in Quesnel, BC. It also holds agreements that allows the company to cut 2.4 million cubic meters of hardwood and 400,000 cubic meters of softwood. After announcing that it would boost the minimum wage for its U.S. workers to $15 an hour, Amazon revealed how it plans to pay for part of the increase. The online giant says next month it will end bonuses which paid workers extra based on their attendance and productivity. Amazon will also phase out its stock unit program, which gave shares to workers if they stayed with Amazon for a certain amount of years. Financial planner and former NHL forward Stu Gavin says whether you're a wealthy hockey player or an average income earner, setting goals is an important step toward financial security.
I think the big thing is for any new client that we're dealing with is cash flow. So they need to understand where it comes from, how much, the consistency of it, but what they spend each month. And some people, it might be a little bit challenging, but through that, at least have minimum savings targets for them for that month or for that year. if it's 5% of your salary each month, or just to say, pay yourself first and put away a little bit, because with that, over a number of years and with proper management, will amount to significant dollars. Thinking you'll get to it tomorrow or later, or I'll start next year, or that I think for a young athlete, and maybe young people generally, is they're invincible, you know, and it's not going to happen to me. And life events to happen to everyone, and so I mean, to protect yourself. I mean, that's on educating yourself on the financial service industry, or what the topic is that you want to, what you're trying to accomplish. So education, I think, is really important. Get an advocate to help you with that decision if required. Ask questions, make sure that you're comfortable with the information, and only then should you act. And if you feel pressure to being rushed, step back.
Now here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, students and teachers at Galbraith Elementary School in Lethbridge were evacuated yesterday due to a sewer gas leak. Around 2 p.m., school staff noticed a smell that was unfamiliar and evacuated students to Wilson Middle School. Staff and students were okay. The gas issue was addressed and classes returned to normal today. When you see news happening, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. Former Tory MP Maxime Bernier believes he and his new party, the People's Party of Canada, should form the next government in the fall of 2019. Watch my full interview with Mr. Bernier next as he explains why. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come out to the Thanksgiving dinner and dance being held Friday, October 5th in the Memorial Hall at the Lethbridge Legion, beginning at 6 p.m. Enjoy a delicious Thanksgiving meal followed by a dance at 7:30 p.m. Live musical entertainment will feature Faye Stevens. There will also be door prizes and a 50-50 draw. Meal cost is $10 per person, and dance tickets are also $10, $9 for members. Come out for an evening of entertainment and fine dining to the 17th Annual Harvest Moon Ball on Saturday, October 13th at the Coast Hotel in Lethbridge at 5 p.m. Proceeds raised will support St. Michael's Health Centre and St. Therese Villa. Help continue the legacy of compassionate healthcare through this worthy cause. Tickets are on sale now. For more information, email ben.kwan@covenanthealth.ca or visit covenantfoundation.ca. The United Way Coats for Kids and Families campaign continues until October 19th, accepting new and gently used winter wear for families in need in the community. Accepted items include coats, mittens, scarves, snow pants, gently used snow boots, and new hats. Items can be dropped off at the United Way and any Lethbridge TD, Canada Trust, or ATB financial branch. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Maxime Bernier dropped a bombshell in late August announcing that he was leaving the Federal Conservative Party he had been once looking to lead. Since then, he started a new political party, the People's Party of Canada, and he joins me now via Skype from Ottawa. Monsieur Bernier, thanks a lot for joining me on Bridge City News.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be with you.
Now, did any member of the Tory party try to talk you out of leaving?
Yes, some of them, but you know, I had the discussion, a good discussion with Andrew Scheer 10 days before I decided to resign. And, you know, after that discussion, I said to myself, I had only two choices. First of all, to go back in the private sector, or if I want to fight for what I believe, more freedom and a smaller government, I said we must create our own party, and that's what we did, and I'm very happy with it.
So what were some of the reasons you gave Mr. Scheer about why you wanted to leave?
Yeah, first of all, you know, I didn't win the leadership campaign 2 years ago with 49% of the votes. That's okay. But a lot of members, conservative members, they like our ideas, our freedom ideas, and the reform and the bold reform that we fight for. And after that discussion with Andrew Scheer, you know, he told me that any of our reform or ideas in our platform, that won't be part of the platform of the Conservative Party of Canada for the next election. So I said, you know, if I want to stay in politics, I will be with a party and fight for what I believe. So when Andrew Scheer told me that, I decided, you know, I don't have any future in this party. We have a platform that people like, and we must go ahead with that. And that's what I did, and I'm very happy.
Now, I follow you on Twitter, as do thousands of other Canadians, and I've seen that you've been unhappy for quite some time now, and you've been wanting to leave for a little while. Did any of the Liberals or NDP talk to you about potentially crossing the floor?
No. I didn't speak with my colleagues, conservative colleagues, or other in the House, other politicians from other parties, so I didn't have time to speak with them. But, you know, it's not... I don't think that the NDP or the Liberal will come to us and support us. We have a platform against the old parties and platform that is based on a less government. And, you know, every member of parliament, they want to support a cartel of supply management. I'm the only one against that. So I didn't expect, and I don't expect any members to come to us. But we have a lot of support from the grassroots, and that's the most important for us.
So what were some of the biggest issues you had with the Tories and Andrew Scheer?
But the biggest one was, as you know, supply management. You know, that's very important. And we just saw that in the negotiation with NAFTA, with the US and Mexico. So if you believe in a free market and you believe that free market is good for us in Canada, how come you will support a cartel and a socialist system that it is a regressive tax on the poor? As you know, they are paying twice the price for poultry, milk, and eggs in Canada. So I'm the only one who is fighting for Canadian consumers. And the Conservative Party of Canada didn't want to change. So, you know, I didn't have any choice.
Now, many people are asking if starting another right-of-centre party will actually guarantee a Liberals majority. How do you respond to that?
First of all, we must say that before I started the party, Andrew Scheer was not winning. He was at 31% of the poll, and Justin Trudeau at 38%. So what I'm saying to them, if you're a conservative and you believe in conservative reform, you must come with us. And I had a lot of support. I have a lot of support from former conservative members, so that's great. But also I'm saying to the NDP, who want to get rid of supply management because it's a regressive tax on poor, they are welcome in our party. The NDP supporters who voted NDP, but they want to get rid of corporate welfare. We're the only party in Parliament that want to get rid of that. They're welcome in our party. And some Liberals also that voted Liberals during Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin for a balanced budget and lower taxes. That's not the Liberal Party of Canada right now. They're welcome in our party. So we want to build a strong coalition. And also people who don't believe in politicians anymore. There's 30% of the population in Canada who did not vote at the last election at the federal level because they don't believe anymore in politicians that are saying something a day and the opposite the other day. So we are doing politics differently, and I think we can attract and having a lot of support from Canadians all across the country.
Now, Monsieur Bernier, tell me about some of the backlash you may have received from former colleagues within the Tory caucus.
But, you know, I'm in house, I'm in Ottawa right now, and I didn't have any conversation with them. So I know that they don't like it because I'm having a lot of their membership that are coming to us. But that's a reality. They're not a conservative party anymore. They're like the Liberals, and they don't want to do the big reform that we need in Canada, speaking about the equalization. Changing the equalization formula. It is not fair. We need to change that formula to be less generous, and that's part of our program. They don't want to speak about that. They don't want to speak on different issues that are important for this country.
So how soon after you lost the leadership race to Andrew Scheer did you think to yourself, you know what, maybe I should form my own party? Was it maybe even a few weeks? You talked to your family, say, that's it, I'm going alone?
No. I try to influence the party and the leader, and I ask them a couple of times to take some of our ideas that are very popular. But at the end of June, when people were telling me, you know, Maxime, we won't take any of your ideas, I was a little bit disappointed. And that's why when I had the call 10 days before I resigned with Andrew Scheer, and he confirmed that, and he told me that all the ideas that I fight for and Canadians like, and our membership, the membership of the Conservative Party of Canada liked, they said we won't take it. At that time, I decided, you know, let's do and create a party. We have a platform, and it's a very popular platform, so let's do it.
Now, what would you say to your constituents in the Quebec riding you represent? Because after all, they voted you in as a Tory, Conservative. Do you think maybe there's a little bit of backlash as well? They say, Maxime, come on, we voted you in as a Tory. You turned your back on us here.
No, what I'm telling them, and I like the question, it's a good question. I said, you know, I'm the right guys. I always fight for smaller government, individual freedom, respect the Constitution, fairness. So I'm a real entrepreneur from both, and I'm very proud of that. And I said to them, you have the same guy, I won't change. That's the Conservative Party of Canada who changed. So I'm just, instead of, I just changed, I had maybe a Lada before, and now I'm in a Mercedes with a party that is 100% in line with what we believe in both and in this country. So the guy is the same. I just have another vehicle to express our position.
So how did you come up with that name then, the People's Party of Canada? Describe that for our viewers.
Yeah, because we are working for the people and not for special interest group in Canada. The best example is supply management. You know, all the other parties in the House, they want to protect 13,000 producers under supply management. They want them to keep their privilege. They represent 10% of the farmers in Canada. So all the other farmers are under a free market. So, and we are paying twice the price for these products. So I won't work for special interest group, and that party won't do that. That's why we're doing politics differently. We are working for all Canadians, and that's why we decided to call it the People's Party of Canada.
Now, a big challenge for you, obviously, will be to field enough candidates to fill 338 ridings across the Canada from coast to coast to coast. How are you making out with that? Have you asked maybe some of the other Tory MPs to cross the floor to come join the PPC?
No, I won't ask any MPs to cross the floor. What I'm doing right now, we are starting to work on the organization. We want to have a riding association ready before the end of this year in 338 ridings. And people, they are doing that right now. We have 2 months to do that. We'll do it. And in January, we'll look for candidates. We need to be ready for the end of June, and we'll be ready. The advantage that we are having, people are coming to us because they like the ideas. And after 2.5 weeks, we have more than 20,000 members. So that's great. And with them, we are starting the riding association all across the country.
So realistically, how many seats do you think you can potentially win in the next election next fall?
We want to be the government. So we'll do everything for having the more seats. But, you know, being realistic, I don't know what will happen. But what happened in Quebec this week with a new government, and in also New Brunswick with a new government, people are ready to vote for a new party. They voted for the CAQ in Quebec, so they're ready to vote for a new party. I think people, they want real change in this country, and the old parties that they're doing politics and they try to please everybody and with promising everything to everybody, Canadians are fed up with that. They want to change, and we will represent that change. So what will be the result in a year from now, I cannot tell you, but I can tell you that we have a momentum, and I'm very happy with it.
Let me ask you something. A lot of us here in the West, especially in Alberta, we feel there's a lot of alienation, a separation between us and Ottawa. There's even talk of Alberta separation, right? So how would you really bridge that gap then between Ottawa, Ontario, and Quebec and Alberta?
Just speaking about our Constitution, respecting our Constitution, and understanding the people in Alberta. Actually, people call me the Albertan from Quebec because we share the same values. You know, I'm a real conservative, and I want to fight for a new equalization formula. a flat tax for entrepreneurs in this country, 10%, two tax rate for Canadians, one at 15%, one at 25%, and no more federal intervention in provincial jurisdiction. So I think when you respect the Constitution, you'll be able to have the support of people in Alberta, but also people in Quebec that want also the federal government to respect the Constitution. Right now, the Conservative, they don't want to speak about that. They don't want to speak about the equalization. They're too afraid to not having seats in Quebec. But I'm telling you that Quebecers and people in Atlantic Canada, they're ready for having this kind of discussion. So we want to represent all Canadians, but people in Alberta, I think they like our platform. It's a real economic platform for real changes in this country.
And get that Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion built. Job number one. Now, if you were ever to become Prime Minister of Canada, what would you do differently than Justin Trudeau?
But first of all, you know, the bill C-69, it's a mess. It's not helping to build new projects in Canada like pipeline. So let's abolish that. Let's put another bill, having a process that would be shorter. And so we have to be sure that the private sector will be able to build pipelines, not the federal government. So, you know, I believe, and I'm coming from Quebec, and I can tell you that Quebecers, they're open for pipelines also, because you know what happened in Lac Mégantic more than 3 years ago, the big train who derailed in a small village over there. So that was a tragedy over there. And people, they know that it's safer to transport oil and gas by pipelines and instead of by train. So I'm 100% for pipeline. Let's have a process that is short, a process that will help us and give the private sector the possibility to build pipelines.
So how would you handle consultations with Indigenous groups on the pipelines?
We have to do consultation, it's okay, but you know, you have to plan these consultations. The federal government has an obligation to do consultation, not an obligation to please everybody and every special interest group. So the federal government just announced that they will stop the negotiation or the consultation, so that's okay. But the federal government must have done that a couple of months ago. Now we still have another delay of a couple of months. So that's why the process, it's too long, and we have to have a new process with a new bill.
Let's talk reconciliation for just a moment here. Is the government doing enough towards rebuilding those relationships with Indigenous communities in Canada?
But what I want to have in our platform, it's a new way, a new vision of our relationship with the First Nation, based on property rights on reserve. And so I'm working on something that will be on our platform. I think, yes, we must acknowledge the First Nation, but we must have a new way to engage a relationship with them based on the Western civilization values. And that would be part of our platform.
Now, your thoughts on the new trade deal, the trilateral trade deal with Canada, the United States and Mexico, the USMCA. Did Canada give away a little too much?
You know, I think that was a tough negotiation because Justin Trudeau put him in a tough spot in the beginning of the negotiation. So right now, and I said, just put the cartel of supply management on the table, the abolition of that cartel, and you will be able to have more. You know, I'm very disappointed right now that there's still tariff on steel and aluminum and softwood lumber. It is not part of the deal. Maybe the best deal will have been to put supply management on the table, to abolish that on a period of 5 to 8 years. And like that, I'm sure that in the US, we will have been able to have more from the US. Right now, we have a deal. It is good, but it is not the best deal because we don't have steel and aluminum part of the deal, and we still have tariffs on softwood lumber.
Now, we only have a few moments left here in the interview. What do you see as the biggest issues for next year's federal election?
The economy, the economy, the economy. That would be that. And maybe also about the immigration. You know, we must have a discussion on immigration, and I want to have that kind of discussion with Canadians. I'm the only one who wants to have that discussion, and I think that would be important also.
Maxime Bernier, leader of the People's Party of Canada, thanks a lot for joining me today from Ottawa.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
This week is Mental Illness Awareness Week. Joining me now via Skype from Ottawa is Chris Somerville, co-chair of the Canadian Alliance on Mental Illness and Mental Health. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you, Hal.
Now, how much of an issue is mental illness? Can you talk about how many Canadians really struggle with this?
Well, it is a big issue, as many Canadians know, because approximately 1 in 5 people today experience a significant mental health problem or mental illness. In fact, by the age of 40, about 50% of the population has had or has a mental illness. And that's a figure that really surprises people, that nearly half of Canadians will have or have experienced a mental illness. And the cost to the economy is $51 billion. So it's a big issue, and one that we continue to address with a lot of great passion.
So how would you define mental illness? What qualifies? Because I think a lot of us probably don't understand how many different kinds of mental illnesses there really are.
Well, I'm not going to sit here and list off all of the different mental illnesses, but there are a lot of them that psychiatrists and psychologists need to distinguish, Hal, between mental distress and mental stress. And then the greater that becomes in terms of affecting your thinking and your cognitive abilities, the greater that becomes, then it creates disorder in your life. I like to say that it interrupts your living, your learning, and your loving, and your playing. And that's why psychiatrists use the phrase a mental disorder, because at that intensity, it brings a great amount of disorder in your life, can interrupt your education, also having to take absence from the workplace. So mental illnesses need great care and great attention, but we have effective treatments for mental illness, and recovery is possible.
Now, most of us have had days when we're feeling blue or down, especially in the winter months when you rarely see the sunshine. But how would someone recognize when the symptoms of depression have crossed over the line and become a mental health issue?
Yeah, part of life is dealing with anxiety and depression. But when that anxiety or depression, or if you're experiencing hallucinations or delusions, you know that you need to be giving attention and self-care when it changes your personality. Friends around you, your parents, for example, may see a sudden change in your personality. Maybe you're not sleeping as well or eating as well. And it begins to interfere with your thinking and your actions and your motivation. And then that disorder comes about in terms of creating some chaos to some degree in your life. And it's at that point that a person needs to seek help. And the good news is, the earlier you go for help, the less likely that it will turn into a significant or lifelong mental illness like schizophrenia.
Are people quite hesitant to actually go for help?
Yes, they're very hesitant. Even though we've made progress about talking about mental health and mental illness, there's still that strong prevalence of stigma, which is, in fact, the number one reason why people are hesitant or don't go and get help. They don't want people to think that they're crazy, a nut bar, or that there's someone like a high-profile individual that has come in conflict with the law that has a mental illness, even though 97% of people with a mental illness never come in conflict with the law or act out in violence.
Now, there's always been a bit of a stigma surrounding mental illness. Can you explain to our viewers what stigma is, what that stigma specifically is, and how can we go about changing it?
Well, stigma is based on prejudice, and we all have some degree of prejudice. So whether it's racism, sexism, ageism, or mentalism, as we call it, stigma has to do that you have a preconceived bias against an individual based on your upbringing, your education, your lack of contact with people with a mental illness. And that social prejudice then is combined with fear and apprehension. And then you bring in or add to that all the mythologies and misunderstandings about mental illness, that, you know, people will be violent, or they can't recover, or there's no treatment, or their parents cause the mental illness, so forth. And so you move from that social prejudice, bias, to stigma, as we call it. And stigma, that's an attitude. Stigma is an attitude, but it always moves into an action, and that action is what we call discrimination. So we're not wanting to just end a stigma, we want to end the discrimination.
Of course, it seems that the mainstream media plays a major role in reinforcing stereotypes we have when it comes to mental illness. Are there certain groups specifically engaging media outlets to change how individuals with mental illnesses are portrayed?
Well, that's a great question, because a lot of people do form their understanding or concept of a mental illness based on movies, horror movies, sitcoms. For example, if a character in a movie is portrayed as having a mental illness, about 60 to 75% of the time they're portrayed as also being violent. Now, in terms of media, the Mental Health Commission of Canada journalists like Andre Picard have been addressing journalist students in terms of how to report on mental illness and suicide, and always have those disclaimers that, for example, what I said a moment ago when I was speaking about violence, I put out a disclaimer that 97% of people living with a mental illness are not violent. And also interviewing a person with lived experience of a mental illness. Oftentimes media simply reports the facts, but they don't interview a service provider, or like a psychologist, or actually interview a person living with bipolar disorder, and they themselves explaining the nature of the illness and how they are living in a life of a recovery. I do mention the word recovery several times, Hal, and that means living beyond the limitations of a mental illness with a sense of purpose and hope and social inclusion as you learn to manage the illness and get on with life and hopefully have a quality of life.
Now, when you talk about the fact that a lot of people with mental illness, they generally are not violent, would that include violence against themselves or hurting themselves?
Right. I mean, people experience violence. People with mental illness are not so much the perpetrators as they are the victims of violence themselves. That is very high, especially with women who experience a mental illness. The rates of violence towards them is much higher than the general population.
Is there less of a stigma today than there was maybe a decade ago?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer, because there are some illnesses that have become more destigmatized, for example, like anxiety disorders and depression. When you look at schizophrenia or psychosis, there's still a heavy layer of stigma. But overall, we've made progress. Employers addressing it in terms of psychological health and safety in the workplace, politicians, some of our political leaders talking about their lived experience or family members. So there is a greater conversation and a greater openness about it than before the commission was created 11 years ago.
Now, one of the issues with mental illness is having proper access to health care. And I understand that can sometimes be a challenge, especially in rural Canada.
Well, yes, it's a huge issue in urban areas as well. People can be waiting from 6 to 12 months to access a service provider. Now, not everyone needs a psychiatrist. It may be a psychologist, it may be a peer support worker. But the more rural you go and the more northern you go, then the harder it is to receive mental health supports and services. The access is greater. So people can be spending over a year, and in some places they have to fly into a major urban area to receive the treatment that's available. And unfortunately, the stigma is also greater. The more rural, the more northern that you go.
Now, healthcare budgets across the country are pretty tight right now. There are a lot of money that goes towards battling heart disease and cancer. Now, do you believe our government needs to invest more money into research and care into the mental illness category?
Well, the short answer is yes. And although the current government in their first year did allocate $777 million over a 10-year period, that's just a drop in the bucket. The Mental Health Commission in its work called for us to move from an average nationally of 7% investment in mental health to 9%, and how some countries are at 12%. So we're still way behind, and we are calling on the federal government to increase spending for mental health and designated for mental health, and that would be approximately about 25% of the federal government's contribution to mental health, to bring it up to 9%, which would improve access to treatment services and also community supports and services as well.
Now, you mentioned some countries invest about 12% of their budget into mental health programs, helping those with those issues. Which countries specifically, and what can we learn from them?
Well, Australia and Scotland, and they have been very progressive, and in England. And in some of those countries, including the United States, they have what's called a Mental Health Parity Act. And so the Canadian Alliance on Mental Illness and Mental Health this week has been asking members of Parliament and senators to consider, more than consider, passing a Mental Health Parity Act, which means that you put mental health on the same playing field. You value mental health as equally to physical health. And so all the services that are provided for people who have cardiovascular problems or metabolic diabetes, et cetera, that same level of focus and intensity and allowing for funding to obtain those services is equal to physical health. So that's parity. In England, they call it parity of esteem. Mental health has low esteem. We want that esteem to go higher.
So what does the road to recovery actually look like for someone struggling with mental illness?
Well, it's very individual. Recovery is based on the concept of hope and looking at the strengths that people have. It's seeing a person, not a illness. A diagnosis is just a label, not your identity. So it can include introducing the patient, if they're in a hospital, to a peer support worker who has lived experience of mental illness, but also has gone on to experience a quality of life or life satisfaction. So service providers then need to engage in their work from what we call a recovery orientation or focus. And that means that people can regain life satisfaction and quality of life. But in order for that to happen, it means that primary care has to be connected to mental health care and also to social care, because relapse prevention is as much about providing the community supports and services as it is medication. And so it's a different approach from what we've historically said. I mean, once upon a time, a diagnosis of schizophrenia was called the kiss of death diagnosis. So we know much more today about how to help people, how to help them to manage the illness, have a better quality of life, but it takes a supporting, caring community, it takes a supporting family, employers, and also addressing the social determinants, the aspects, unresolved trauma issues, lack of housing, things that add stress. I mean, we don't know what causes a mental illness, but we certainly know what triggers every mental health condition, issue, or illness, and that's stress. So if you don't have adequate housing, if you don't have employment, that can lead at least to mental distress, if not to a mental illness.
So how are our schools handling mental health issues for students, whether it's in an elementary school classroom or even at the college or university level?
Well, the awareness has grown significantly. How? I hear educators, principals, guidance counselors, and school teachers as I travel across Canada, they themselves talking about their concern for their students as students are presenting with more mental health issues or conditions. And so different associations, for example, Association of Principals, guidance counselors, are looking at provincial governments and working with provincial governments in terms of the mental health branch or department about developing curriculum. And how do you talk to a 10-year-old about mental health? Well, I encourage, even as we have discussions about dental health with kids, why can't we have that same relaxed, safe conversation about mental health and mental health education, so that people don't feel that it's abnormal or that stigma, that uncomfortableness, that there's something wrong in my mind, my thinking. elementary students, for example, don't necessarily have to have a word for it, but if they're saying that they feel sad and they're having difficulty sleeping, or they feel bullied, or there's a change in the behavior of the child, certainly something's going on, and that person needs great care and attention.
We only have a few short moments left here, Chris, but quickly I wanted to ask you, we were talking off camera about this, I want you to share with our viewers your right hand and how you actually lost your right hand. Interesting story.
Well, I grew up in Alabama. I was born there in 1952, came to Canada in 1985, and we would go to Louisiana and alligator hunt. And so when I was 17, putting the rope on the alligator, I didn't do it right, and my hand was bit, and the doctors were not able to save it. And so I've had a prosthesis, a hook, as we call it, since that time. So yeah, alligator hunting, that's how I lost my
Alligator
right.
hunting accident, wow. How cool is that? That's amazing. Chris Somerville, co-chair of the Canadian Alliance on Mental Illness and Mental Health. Thanks a lot for joining me today.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Have a great night.